Jager, and my name is Rick de Jager. And as I've said before, I wanted to make some videos about my experience with my son having Kriti Shah. And the reason I'm doing this is because when we received the news, we were trying to find real world stories of Kriti Shah, and there was a lot of generic sort of um, information around, and so I found it very difficult to associate myself to that and understand it, translate it to my situation. So I wanted to make these videos to create such content, and I'm hoping that by adding that Kriti Shah awareness hashtag to my videos, that incentivizes people to also do that, create their own videos, and more of this content will ultimately be available so that future parents can find those real world videos. So today, what I wanted to talk about was your first visit to the physio, your occupational therapist, and a speech and language therapist. I wanted to do this because it's kind of a trick to sort of explain why these people are important, how it associates to the illness, and where the priorities may lie, what you may want to focus on, the questions you may want to ask, etc. So today we're going to talk about the physio, the speech and language therapist, and the occupational therapy in that order, because you'll likely receive it in that order. And hopefully this will help you in navigating at least your first visits with these individuals. Later on, it'll become clear what specific deficiencies there may be with your child, and what kind of the strategy will be. So there's nothing I can really add upon that anymore, because you already be so zeroed in on what you need for your child. So the physio is likely the first person you'll see after you've seen a pediatrician and geneticist, i.e. you've had the news, you're dealing with Kriti Shah, and at that point a few referrals are being made, and likely the physio is going to be one of them. Likely one of the big topics is going to be hypertonia, where the muscles, especially around the joints, they just have more flexibility, and this flexibility is not a good thing. It's a bad thing, because it means that essentially the children are standing on a house of cards. They wobble and find their balance more difficult, and that's something that'll impact their ability to walk, crawl, everything that you might expect. So you work with the physio to identify the severity of the hypotomia, and dependent upon where in the development of the child you are, you identify what you want to do next. If you're very early on, you may want to prioritize belly time, and there are tricks, at least for Kriti Shah, that I found very effective. You've got like these round belly time mats which are filled with water. They are just amazing, because the Kriti Shah kids, they love the water. So if you have one of these mats that is just essentially a waterbed, a round waterbed on which they lie, and they just see the fishies inside, they just find it so utterly interesting and captivating. I can't explain to you why, but they're so drawn to it, that it's a great motivator. If you're trying to crawl, you have to find things that they attach to. For us, it was one of those roly polies, one of those plasticky objects that just wiggles and moves in a funky way, and it makes a sound. And whenever he touches it, it makes a sound and it makes a movement, and it was just incredibly captivating for him. So that really motivated the crawl. And then, when he was when he was learning to walk, it started with standing. So create a table and have stuff in front of you, and make it worth his while to stand there. All these things, and so the hypotonia will eventually will likely be the big topic. What I also found interesting was the context in which they positioned the walking bit. So here in the Netherlands, we had one of those days whereby the physio, the SaLT, and the occupational therapist, they all stood in one room, and they studied my son. And the funny thing was they prioritized walking. You think they talk about hand gestures and communication being important, and stimulating the mind, etc. But they felt that if you stimulate the walking, the act of walking is such a stimulant to the intellectual development of the child that prioritizing the walking was also, from a SaLT and an occupational therapy perspective, a prudent thing to do. So it was very interesting to see where, if you get these people working together holistically together, where they prioritize time spent at different stages of the development. So very interesting. I did want to raise a topic that may actually not be Kridisha specific. It has happened to kids we know. Some Kridisha, some not, of course. But hip dysplasia was also relevant to us. So we went to see the physio. We heard certain clicking. The physio was suspicious. We did not trust it. We did not know it. So we went to a developmental pediatrician. He also fell around and just also didn't trust it. So there was concerns that hip dysplasia was a factor. Finding it early is really key. And so we had an X-ray, and all seemed fine. Based upon that, we did not diagnose hip dysplasia with our son, but it was touch and go for a while. We were genuinely concerned, and as were the medical staff. So genuine point of observation. I would also study any asymmetry in the spine and the hips. So if you look at the child from behind, for us, we saw it kind of in the bottom, where there was like a line from the spine running down, and there was like this Y happening just above the buttocks, and you could just sort of see there was more of a curvature to the right than to the left. And this kind of stuff can influence walking and just general advice you can get from a physio. So it's something you may just want to look at, just to see if there's any asymmetry happening on in the spine. Again, I'm not a medical individual. I've just gone through some of these tests, and I'm just relaying what I've learned, and it may all be absolutely bogus, but it may also be absolutely beneficial to you. If you do diagnose things like hip dysplasia early on, there's a lot you can still do. If you do it early on, there are certain casts essentially that you can be placed within, and they can sort of redirect some of the pressures, and they can affect something of a change in the body, whereby the hip dysplasia is corrected, and in later years as if it never happened. So finding these things early on is really important. And my last point on this particular topic is going to be having your various therapists communicate with each other is going to be important, because they all make their own observations and they can actually inform each other, and they can actually prioritize together. And because, doing so many hours with all of them is going to be difficult to do, because it's already such a stretched situation. There are various reasons why you might be visiting the hospital. There might be very quite tight routines you want to observe because of sleeping rhythms and eating rhythms and everything. And if you then squeeze in all of these therapists and doing all that stuff, it can be really tough. So prioritizing, focusing on the things that are at that particular stage in the development, the most important things to do, that might be quite critical. So it might not be physio, it might be speech and language, it might be occupational. I don't know, but just always keep asking yourself the question: um, are we managing towards the more important things that we need to be managing towards? I'm sure you are, but always have that question in the back of your mind. Speech and language for me is the most important therapist you'll see. With Kridisha, at least from all the medical journals I read, but also from the stories I hear from other parents, what's happening in the throat is quite unique. For us, obviously, we dealt with dysphagia, so there was a timing issue. The swallowing was happening. The timing of it was not in sync with the act of eating, for example, or drinking. And so sometimes it was possible for him to aspirate silently. So swallowing something into his lungs, a fluid, without coughing. So that's quite a serious thing, because some fluids may contain bacteria and may actually cause a lung infection. So this is a very serious topic, and working with a speech and language therapist to address that is going to be probably priority number one. But getting dysphagia diagnosed can actually be the hard part, because we went through quite a lot of issues where dysphagia wasn't diagnosed, and everything seemed normal to all kinds of medical specialists. So I would try to get a referral from your GP to see a speech and language therapist, and they will quite quickly identify it if there is something going wrong. They won't be able to make a final diagnosis of what is going wrong, but they'll at least be able to steer you onto the right path with the necessary medical practitioners to identify exactly what's going on. So getting that understood is priority number one, in my opinion. Another topic that you'll deal with a speech and language therapist, depending upon where in development you are, is you'll talk about the basics of communication. So when you're really at that young age where it's belly time, and it's really early on, it's all about eye contact, and it gradually moves on from eye contact to play, to sharing, and all those sorts of things. It really depends, and this is going to be a big topic: communication, the basics of it, the basics of understanding. And then from there, you build more elaborate communication, and that could be a whole host of things, and we'll get into that. So I'm cutting this up into the three different parts, because I think it's important to identify each individual part, because you might be seeing them, the speech and language therapist, for that one specific topic. So I'm cutting it up into these 3 parts, but it may well be that you're just seeing the SaLT for that one thing. So the dysphagia is, of course, going to be the big topic, in my honest opinion, because it's the most life-threatening. Immediately, if you get the diagnosis, you will want to know whether there is dysphagia going on or not. Dysphagia is, of course, a umbrella term for any swallowing trouble. It could be many things that could be going wrong. There could be some excess skin. There could be a neurological issue. There could be a whole host of things going on. So, it's really important to highlight dysphagia, to ask the question: is something going wrong? And if something is going wrong, what likely will the culprit be? What are we hearing? So, the speech and language therapist will put his or her ear to the chest to try and listen for any particular sounds that coincide with fluids being in the lung. What they'll do is they'll try to listen to the swallow itself, and from there on in, a diagnosis could be made already of dysphagia or not. For us, we actually had to do a fluoroscopy to properly understand what was going on. So, a proper X-ray, having X-rays done while the swallow was being made, and looking at how the fluids were being moved. And, from there on in, we then played with thickening of the fluids to a point where the fluids weren't going into the lungs. So we went to ITSI level 2. I think there are 4 levels, and we felt 3 was just too thick. It was just so thick. It was, for me, it would have been hard to swallow. For him, I can only imagine it being just 10 times harder. And 2 was, for us, it was the sweet spot. So, that's what we decided upon. And then, over time, you'll continue to work on the swallowing to see what you can do to help him or her with the strategy around the swallowing. Can also be about how do you integrate solids into his or her diet. So what foods do you start with? How do you prepare them? How do you progress? It can be, a long road, to be absolutely honest. It took us, probably 2.5 years to properly be on solids, and we still have some foods we're concerned about. So, yeah, it's not a straightforward thing. So absolutely discuss this topic with your speech and language therapist, and every experience will be very individual. Every child will have his or her own idiosyncrasies. So the basics of communication is something that's going to be a big topic. This is going to be tricky because you'll likely be associated as a speech and language therapist because of this dysphagia. So there's like an immediate health requirement for the SaLT therapist. But then communication may actually be electively insured, or depending upon which country you're in, or whatever. Absolutely get a speech and language therapist on your communication early on, so that you individually get the education you need to understand what the basics are, how you elicit them, how you build that relationship. And if you're really lucky, you actually get to see a speech and language therapist on a very regular basis. And you won't be the speech and language therapist on a daily basis. It will actually be an external person, but of course, not everyone will have that experience. So if you do get exposure to a speech and language therapist, and you are limited in the time you can have with them, absolutely focus on dysphagia, but milk all the time you can to talk about communication and what you need to be doing with your child. It's really important. So for us, we learned about Kridisha at about uh, a year and a half old, um, but we already had issues earlier on, and I think already at about a year and 2 months old, we had clear indications of dysphagia, and we had diagnosed it, and we were getting um, um, guidance then. So we were beyond um, um, sort of belly time, um, but you know, we really started with the eye contact. We made sure that the eye contact was there. The eye contact is there. It's a teachable child. If there's absolutely no eye contact, it's going to be very tricky to get the attention you need to teach the child. So if you get eye contact, that's just great. That's just a massive win. And do anything you can to improve that. Everything can be improved. So if you can get improvement into the eye contact, absolutely do it. Use games and play to uh, to elicit it. For me, when I had the most fun with my son on the bed. It's a place where he can play rough. He really liked being, hoisted up in the air and dropped on some pillows. It was the most fun for him. So playtime on the bed was just always a lot of fun. So I would use my eyes there, to build anticipation. So if I were to enlarge my eyes, that would signal to him that I was about to do something. Um, it's a silly thing, but these little things make him pay attention. Oh, something's about to happen, so I must pay attention. And it just I'm not saying this was the thing, but this is an example of the kind of play you can utilize. From there, you want to play together. So are there games that he plays? Balls he throws down a tube or something that you can share in, so that when he throws a ball down, that you throw a ball down. I say silly things, and then over time, what you want to do is you want him to give you his ball so that you then do it, and then you give your ball to him so that he does it, and then you share. These kinds of things you'll develop with the speech and language therapist, but this is the kind of stuff you need to be thinking about. um, I also found it just very interesting to understand how speech is developed. um, So mama is the most easiest thing to say. For example, you just make a sound and you drop your lower lip. Um, yeah, I never understood it that way. So there are sounds that are going to be very easy early on, and you want to focus on. And if you can't get any speech, then there are other ways of getting speech engaged. But we'll elaborate. So obviously communication is going to be key. um, what we're noticing in our son is that he gets frustrated. There are things he wants: a food, a drink, something on television, a toy, an activity, and he can't articulate what he wants. What happens then is usually self-harm. So he'll get frustrated and he'll start banging his head either on the floor, against his arm. He'll bite himself, sometimes us. It's a difficult situation. For me, there is a correlation between the quality of communication that he has and his frustration. The more he can communicate, the less he'll get frustrated. So communication is going to be absolutely critical, especially when you get into the toddler years and on. It may be possible that speech is difficult to attain in at least the first years and potentially even adulthood. So what you then try to do is create speech in alternative methods. So sign language is a very obvious thing to mention. We found sign language quite complicated for him to grasp. So it didn't work for us, but it could be a very real option for you. Talking cards could be very effective. But again, it hasn't connected with us yet. Talking buttons, we have had quite some success with. So these are just buttons you actually press. You can actually integrate a picture into it of an object, of an activity, or whatever, and you can record the phrase that coincides with it. So I can really recommend the talking buttons. A speech computer is obviously very effective for some. We haven't tried it, so don't know. And of course, speech is going to be the most impactful. Our son, he's now 3.5. We do hear him evolving in his speech, which is more of complexity in his mumbling, but it's limited. So work with your speech and language therapist on this. Occupational therapy. This is interesting because it may not be about the child. It may actually be about you. Occupational therapy could be about the child sitting in the right posture and things like that. So dinner table, chair. But it could also be about safety for the child. So we're talking about a bed with padded cushions that is fully enclosed and has a high top. It could be about having that bed raise itself so that you can change the child without having to bend over. It could be a bath that can effectively raise so that you can take the child out of the bath more easily. It could be many things, but it's all about support for you as a parent and the child, where it's about safety, where it's about not hurting yourself. So definitely consider seeing an occupational therapist if you can, and talk about any of the stresses that you experience, any of the pains you experience, any of the help that you may need or the child may need. So that is roughly what I wanted to discuss today. It's a very short one, and I'll look to do another video soon, I hope. Thank you very much.